Hey, what is going on, you beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of Transcending Explorations. Thank you for being here, for tuning in, for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. It means the absolute world to me. I really hope that you guys love this show, that you enjoy it, and that you get a ton of value from these episodes and from the podcast in general. And if you do obtain or receive some value, then I invite you to engage in the value for value model by actualizing the value you perceived you received, whether that's in the form of money or your time and your talents, or investing in the companies that I'm affiliated with. There are so many different ways that you can choose to, if you like, support this show. So links will be in the description to all of those. So in today's episode, I had the opportunity to reconnect with Ben Calder. In our previous episode, we had Ben Calder on to explore spirituality and spiritual development from this integral approach, from this comprehensive, whole and balanced approach. And like I mentioned in the previous episode introduction, for you guys to check out, if you're interested, Ken Wilber's work, and specifically the book that he co-authored, The Integral Life Practice. I'll put a link in the description. It's a phenomenal book. It's really like the basis, the kind of, the bedrock slab of how I like to live my life is with this integral model. And you can really apply it to anything and everything. It's really flexible, malleable, and applicable, which is so incredible. So we applied this integral model and framework and way of looking at things to health. Ben has a background as an integrative health practitioner, I believe is what you would call him, an integral health practitioner maybe. Nonetheless, he's incredibly holistic, incredibly comprehensive, inclusive, and transcendental as well with the way that he approaches health, which is what I find so beautiful and fascinating and amazing about where he comes from with his work. And so this was really a health-centric exploration. We began with diving into Ben's morning and night routine and how he likes to structure his days based on his unique self, which led us off into some other areas I completely did not expect us to venture down. But we also talked about circadian cycles and the environment in which you encapsulate yourself in, and the direction in which you sleep, getting into a bit of feng shui and the shape of the home that you encapsulate yourself in, the shape of the building, and how that's going to influence you on all levels of your being. We also get into finding some sense and some understanding and some meaning around what health even is, and also what is disease, what are illness, what are symptoms, why do these things manifest, are they random, do we manufacture them? There's all these interesting questions around symptoms and illnesses and diseases that I think is definitely worth exploring, and especially exploring the relationship of our mind and our health. And Ben says something so beautiful in this podcast, that the body wears the shape that the mind creates. Really think about that one. I really, really love the way he has phrased that. The body wears the shape the mind creates. So we get into a fascinating dialogue about perception and physiology and vice versa, how the external world is also informing our mind, and how this interconnected relationship works. Really some fascinating stuff that we touch on within that So, yeah, obviously we get into a lot more within this, but that is a general overview of today's episode, really approaching health and wellness from this beautiful, integral perspective. And so, with that said, I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope you love it. If you do, please take 2 minutes out of your day to leave a rating, a review, to hit that subscribe button, and to share this around with a friend, a family member, or chuck it up on social media. I love you guys immensely. Thank you for the support. Thank you for being here, and enjoy this transcendent exploration with Ben Calder. Ben Calder, welcome back yet again to Transcending Explorations, mate. It's so good to connect with you again within this very quick week.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Lachlan. It's beautiful to be back. The last conversation was so rich and so enjoyable. It's great to come back in and continue with that. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's a pleasure. So, just being the curious person I am, seeing it's morning here and it's nighttime over there. I'm big on like morning routines and night routines and really kind of structuring my day. I'm just curious, is that something that you incorporate into your day, having a morning routine and a night routine?
I mean, I think whether we believe it or not, everybody does. It just depends on what you want to define into that.
Yeah.
And I think before I kind of give details away, it's also something that in true integral life practice format gets scaled depending on what's going on. So nothing is completely fixed. For me, I find that being overly rigid about any one particular practice at times can then be detrimental. So I tend to have a fairly fluid response to that. But certainly, I like to try and have 2 periods of meditation in a day. I would say as kind of rituals, so preferably one in the morning and preferably one in the evening. And I tend to do different types of meditation at the start of the day. So I'll tend to do what I would class as a more mind engaged meditation at the beginning of a day. So I might use a mantra or a kriya or something to focus on that's kind of sharpening my mind as I'm coming out of the sleep state. And then in the evening, in contrary, that's when I tend to prefer the Zen style shikantaza, just sitting, essentially just letting everything dissolve back into nothingness. So it's kind of like the morning brings that kind of focus in, and the evening just allows it all to dissolve, which thankfully then leads to a really beautiful sleep. And so I'll tend to do a bit of meditation, and then depending on what my day involves, I consider it a cornerstone of my day to have a great breakfast. Having worked in kind of nutritional circles and the epigenetic work that I do for so many years now, I understand my requirements as a body. So I like using car metaphors quite a lot with bodies as well. If you know your car takes longer to warm up in the morning, or it requires a particular thing to get the best out of it, then it's important to do that. And I know for myself, it's really important for me to have a good breakfast. I really find it helps to set my metabolism up and again, just my energy levels to be able to do what I want. But depending on how strong my day is and what I need to do, I also like to do Life Force Qigong. So it's my main movement practice, a system that's developed by my brother Sai Calder, who for many, many years studying out in Asia with many amazing teachers. And he's distilled this beautiful Qigong practice together in a number of levels, looking at a number of different things. And so I love to engage in Life Force Qigong practice. And again, depending on how my day goes, if I need to eat earlier because of work or other things, then I'll tend to find time a little bit later in the day to do the practice. And then I like to be honest, I like to try and get as much of my work done as early in the day as possible. I'm not always, just because of the way I am as an individual, I'm not always the very best in the mornings. So I find that once I've kind of got going, if if I can get my heavy bulk of the work done, anything that I really need to use my mind for and focus in, if I can do that earlier in the day, that's better. And then later on in the day, I'll tend to look at other physical activities. So maybe going walking, or we've got beautiful hills around where I live here, or climbing, or doing some other kind of physical practice for myself. And then also that's where my other leisure activities will tend to kind of slide in. So I like to play the guitar and listen to music. So, I'll look for that. And then as much as possible, I try and make the evenings as calm as possible. So I'm quite strict for the most part. I don't tend to use technology after 7 p.m. at night. So mainly because I'm looking to really scale down the stimulation in my system as we go into the evening. And certainly here in the UK, as the light levels drop down as well, I don't really want to be engaging in anything that's going to stimulate blue light within my system. Even in our house here in the evenings, we'll tend to use things like salt lamps and low level lighting in our living room, in our kind of our main hangout space, rather than any kind of brighter light. So again, we're schooling those pineal glands to just recognize that we're going into darkness. It really supports hormonal balance in the body. And again, in the mornings, I look for the light as soon as I can. So typically we don't close our curtains here in the house, so that the morning light is being activated through our systems as well. So that tends to give you an idea of a day in a rough way.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many good insights into that. Obviously, the first one kind of you touching on like the uniqueness of really understanding who you are, so you can create your day according to your uniqueness. And you could look at this from an Ayurvedic perspective and a Chinese medicine perspective based on your elemental makeup. If you're a Kapha, Pitta, or Vata, right? I'm a Pitta. I'm very fiery. I like to get up and move straight away. I like to get into a gross physical exercise and then get into my Qigong meditation. But that's just based on my unique self. And I also love what you said about being in harmony with the environment, these light and dark cycles, these circadian cycles, I think. And, you could probably speak to this. Do you find this to be a big wrench that people throw into their circadian cycles to just kind of ruin it ultimately with the blue light and the tech? And is this a big thing you deal with people?
Absolutely. And I think the reason is that it's only in the last, really the last 100 years, but definitely the last 20 to 30 years that we've even had to consider this. You could maybe say that since the Second World War, the way that industry and certainly business and commerce have moved, working hours have changed in a lot of ways, but we kind of forget how connected to nature we ought to be. Mm-hmm. And we've moved into these cycles where 24/7 we can practically do anything we want. I don't know what it's like for where you are, but I can be 5 minutes away from my house and I can go to a 24-hour store and get things anytime I need, pretty much every day of the week. Yeah. There's enough lighting on that I really don't have to be concerned about the dark and so on. And there's absolutely no doubt that our brains are so, we're solar beings. We're so fueled in light that I think a lot of the crises we're seeing in health are supported by the fact that most people, or a lot of people, spend a significant amount of more time indoors. They spend a significant amount more time sat down, and they spend a significant amount more time using devices that are acknowledged as remote behavior modification. They're there to kind of entrance us into their use. And so we're stimulated in completely different ways. Whereas, we have a camper van here and we like to take it away. And so, we just don't have those aspects. And we find that, as it's getting dark, we've had our dinner, maybe we've had a fire, but our bodies become much more tired and much more ready for rest. If we looked at our clock, it wouldn't be the same as if we're doing it at home. And the same with waking up. This is why I like waking up with the sunlight as much as our country allows,
Yeah.
because it has that big impact on my health. And I've been a very, very good sleeper for decades now, because I've looked at what me as an organism really needs, which is nothing about humanness, and it is really about being a mammal, being an organism at that kind of level.
Yeah, exactly. I always think, if you put a regular modern human being in this like modern world back into nature, they would naturally breathe through their nose. They would like naturally drink high quality water. They would be in sync with their circadian rhythm. So therefore they're going to sleep well, and all these so-called diseases, symptoms, and illnesses would somewhat just disappear, because ultimately I think these are all just messages trying to tell us to come back to that natural, authentic state of being. And I want to kind of get into what even is disease, like how you perceive what this process, this manifestation is. But I just want to make a couple comments on what we're talking about here with the environment, because I really think we're deficient in darkness. Like if you look at the planet from the International Space Station, the planet's lit up like a fucking Christmas tree. Like it's constantly lit up. And then from a world-centric view, you got to think about the bees and the insects and the animals that are not actually getting their sleep. And obviously we need the plants and the trees to live. And they're also being dramatically influenced from these light cycles. I also think, because I see the circadian rhythm as like the orchestra for our body's symphony. So and I almost think like the sun's inside of us, so we're not like connecting with it on the outside. It's still moving within us in that cycle, but we need to be in congruence with it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole nature behind the horary cycle within Chinese meridian theories, in the fact that every meridian is rushing or dominant for 2 hours a day. And that's based on how the sun is moving. Essentially, the sun is an enormous magnetron running around a magnetized core of our planet. So it's constantly charging. And this is why we can end up with jet lag when we travel, and especially when we're flying east. And so we're going against the path of the sun. That magnetic stimulation within our systems becomes disturbed. And so we end up with something that's out of sync until we essentially get 3 to 5 solar circles going back on again. And so that magnetron then recharges the pathways and we get over our jet lag. And within kinesiology, in that main body of work that I do, but also within meridian work and energy work through Qigong, there are ways of actually accelerating that, of stimulating those meridian pathways so they catch up much more quickly. And in my kind of trips, both east and west within the world, I've always used these methods, and I just don't get jet lag. And, I've handed them to many of my clients, and they all report a reduction in jet lag within the system because they understand why they were having it in the first place.
Wow. So I guess that could also be scaled down to a micro level, because people are like socially jet lagged. And I guess, again, just because they're not in tune in the way that we're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
I wonder, just because you mentioned kind of that like magnetic kind of aspect, are you looking at the direction in which you sleep kind of from a feng shui perspective, and how we are a microcosm of the earth? So, like two magnetic poles, if you have a positive and a positive, they're going to repel. So I wonder if that's something you're looking at too.
Yeah, well, I tell you, in the last 19 years, I've experimented with more things than I can remember in terms of that. But there is definitely qualities within that are relevant and important, and the concepts are important to understand. And again, like integral theory in a lot of ways, we're looking at a map, but the territory itself is then unique to the location. And what I typically find, although there are some directions that I think I might be better off in, and there are certainly experiences I've had where I've experimented with that and it's been incredibly useful, I also think it's because the actual space that I'm in has allowed for that. Because there's been a few places where I've because essentially in feng shui you come down to the idea of being an easting or a westing. So there are a set of particular directions that will work for you and the ones that don't. And there have been times when I've tried to force that into a space, and the space itself wasn't in the right shape for that. So actually the energetic of the box that I'm in, the room that I'm in, the building that I'm in, actually creates a dissonance rather than a coherence when you come into that space. So you also have to take into account the actual space that you're in when you're applying that, and what that allows for, and the energies of that within itself. Because it may be that there are other natural energy pathways that are running through that space, that if you then cut across them because you think that your head ought to be that way, you actually create more dissonance than you do coherence. So, you always have to kind of adjust for what the situation is at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's there's so much more to be thinking about. Yeah. Also, not only the space that you're in, but like what's going on underneath the ground with these energy channels that are running through. But that's what an integral mind incorporates, of course.
Exactly. And even the building materials,
Yes.
Are you in a wooden place, a cement place? Is it made of hempcrete? Is it in a tower block? What's it surrounded by? My partner and I were lucky enough a couple of weeks back to take a trip down to Wiltshire, which is one of the counties further down in England. And it's the home of Stonehenge and Avebury and a lot of the old megalithic sites. And we ended up staying in an Airbnb in a village that was on a ley line between Avebury and Stonehenge. And we didn't know it when we booked the place. But when we were staying in that place, you could feel like it was a really old village as well, thatched cottages, quintessential kind of British space. And you could really feel the energies running in the village. And they deliberately created movements in the roads to try and deal with some of that standing stone in the middle of the village right next to the church as well. So there was a lot of potency in there. And so depending on the land, the buildings, the materials, all of these factors can influence the experience. And I think it's really important with all kind of integral life practice stuff that, again, attachment is the cause of suffering, if we go back to the beautiful Buddhist idea. And so if we say that we must do a thing in a certain way, otherwise we're not all right, then we've already lost our referent. We're not actually relating to the present moment of what we're experiencing. We're actually basing it on something that's the past and using it as a control strategy. So it's much better to stand in a place, tune in, and work out what I need, what it needs, what we need, looking at those kind of three basic spheres to be in the best harmony and the best kind of coherence and resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just find it fascinating. One, that we are open-ended systems interacting with other open-ended systems, that being your home, obviously the buildings and like everything is an open-ended system. And I do think, health could be kind of defined as that ability to adapt to any given situation or environment. But I have to make one more comment before we actually get into what health is and disease, because, this is just fascinating, because I just find it so interesting how the shape of the buildings that we encapsulate ourselves in can dramatically influence us. I know Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Biogeometry, I don't know if you're aware of him, but, he's highlighted this massively, especially with square linear school buildings and kids having more anxiety, more stress, and actually being pushed even more into the left side of their brain, being less artistic and creative. And then just another comment I wanted to make on top of this is, you probably take this perspective too, but from a health perspective, your home is an extension of your body. It's just like literally an extension. So it's also going to be giving you clues about what's going on inside. But any thoughts on those?
Yeah, comments? Of course. I mean, there's been some beautiful experiments with the geometry of plant beds, so making them in different geometric shapes, and how that affects growth cycles, because again, they're holding energetic qualities. And a really easy experience for anyone to do is, if you get yourself some big pieces of paper and draw squares, triangles, circles, hexagons, octagons, different shapes on them, cut them out and then stand on them and move from one to the other, and then just tune in, and you'll get a direct variance in experience with each one if you've got that sensitivity. So it definitely has that kind of impact, and definitely in the way we kind of learn and the way we relate to the world, shape and pattern is massively important. I often use the phrase that the body wears the shape that the mind creates. And the house in itself, the space that we reside in, is exactly that. And that's also why sometimes we get really resistant to making changes, because if we change our personal environment around, it will create a different mindset. And there are other times, once you've done that the space feels totally different. It can become super inspiring for us. When I'm a big one for keeping the clutter clear as much as possible, keeping things tidy, keeping things in order. I think that has great value in our health and well-being, not letting stagnancy accumulate. And so when we can kind of regulate our environment, and I'm really lucky, my partner is an interior designer and a house refurbisher, and so she has courage in a way that I find inspiring, to just go, let's change this around like this, and it doesn't intimidate her at all to create total chaos in a space, because she can already see the coherence that will return. And I really, really admire that in her. And so it's interesting to do that. Move your bed around, move your stuff around, get rid of the things you're hanging on to that you haven't touched in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Ask yourself what the anchor is, why you're really still attached to it, and find a way to let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself doing that quite often, actually, like really just constantly moving things around. And, I find that's an indication or a manifestation of a pattern change going on inside of myself. So anytime I find myself like, oh, I need to move this around, or I need to remove things, I need to throw things out, like there's too much in here, I recognize that, I'm changing something inside of myself, or as well. I'm just going to close my curtains because it's a daytime disco going on in my camera.
Yeah, I noticed the flash there. I wondered what the disco was.
Now it's going to be too dark. How is that better? Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, so I want to move into talking, really just getting some sense and some meaning and some understanding from your perspective of what health is. It's this word that's kind of thrown around a lot. There's obviously a whole field and everything around it. I guess the general consensus is health is simply the absence of disease. But yeah, how do you view it and perceive it? Like, what is the meaning of health to you?
Sure. I mean, unsurprisingly, that's going to operate on a number of different levels for me.
Yes.
And I think perhaps one of the most fundamental and one of the most useful for me is looking at the coherence within my system or somebody's bioenergetic system, and looking at that again from body, mind, spirit, and self-culture and nature in a true kind of integral style. But is there dissonance taking place, and is that creating harm within a space? So because we have this concept that stress is a bad thing, but there's a difference between distress, which is destructive, and eustress, which is actually stimulating, encouraging, and positive. So we need a certain amount of stress to be able to motivate us and encourage us and help us along. But I think one of the best ways to kind of understand some aspects of health through the idea that everything in the right proportions is a medicine and in the wrong proportions is a poison. So, and you can again take that in body, mind, spirit, relationships, environment, however you like. I prefer to live in the country and go to visit the city. That works better for me because I find that stimulating, interesting, useful. But I know if I lived in the city, it wouldn't be good for me and I would struggle to get out of the country. So it's finding that kind of balance. And I guess health is you being able to do the things that you really want to do that are joyful, beneficial, constructive, and add value into the world, where you're not just surviving, you're not just managing to get through, but you're actually thriving. And, you know, when we look at the world, really, if we ignore the kind of the less positive side of human beings, but look at other biological systems, the majority of them are about cooperation. They're about working together, essentially, to be healthy and to survive and to thrive and to kind of go forth and multiply, if you like. So finding the coherence that allows that. And in the sense of my brother Sai's work in Life Force Qigong, it's also about being able to hold our own center and be in that space of constant adaptation. So, you know, it's one thing to say that wearing, you know, in this case, my body warmer keeps my body warm. But if I'm wearing it in 30-degree heat and I'm sweating and dehydrating myself, it's unhealthy. So it's about being able to adapt to what the circumstance is, holding a degree of neutrality, and being able to hold one's own center, whatever the situation is, and then being able to choose in a healthy manner. So that, again, around this kind of whatever is unique in any situation that you're in, rather than sticking with rules that are fixed, I can or I must do this and I can't or I mustn't do that, you have to look at what is right for the situation. Where am I in flow with the situation that I'm in? Because if I'm in flow, then all matter is energy anyway. Everything is energy anyway. So all I'm doing is flowing with the nature of the energy, rather than, you know, you can look at it from a simple red light, green light point of view. Is the red light stopping me? Is it heavy? Is it contractive? Is it feeling like it's the wrong direction for me? Or do I get that green light of go, of flow, of expansion, of opening, of being something that nourishes me on maybe multiple levels, but on whatever level it feels like it nourishes me, and being able to follow those green lights moment to moment through your life as they are supporting you, and I find they lead to the best experiences in our life.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I really love that red light, green light. Yeah, that's it sounds very similar to, you know, my good friend Marcus's follow the energy. So he has this follow the energy, and I get a visualization almost like there's this literally this energetic line coming from the center of me that's connected to like where I really need to go. That's just like recognizing and follow that energy. And then, yeah, also use the red light, green lights. That's great. I want to throw out a couple definitions of health. So I think health encompasses disease and non-disease. And it's almost like a container that allows for the disequilibrium and then equilibrium. And I think health is that coming out of balance and then coming back into a greater pattern or a greater level of organization. So we know evolution thrives on tension and disequilibrium. So I think from that one definition, that health encompasses both non-disease and disease. You know, non-disease plus disease equals health, and disease plus non-disease equals health. Another way I think of framing that is to share that health is basically consciousness expansion in action. And I think, again, it's that disequilibrium. And as you know, we're constantly finding a greater balance. And then one more that this was like the first ever definition that I came up with for health. And I still think it's a pretty good analogy. I think of health as like the soil for a human being, and kind of the soil and the environment. So obviously that you need good, high quality soil and the right environment to get a tree and a plant that grows fruit and flourishes and flowers. But if you have poor quality soil, you minimize the ability for that plant, or, you know, you might actually get a weed, but that plant to grow to its maximum capacity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think you've got some beautiful points in there. One of the things I would reflect back on that as well, especially around your kind of disease and non-disease all being part of health. How do we know what coherence is unless we feel dissonance? How do we know what to equalize unless something is unequal? So, to be able to find those spaces within ourselves, we have to know where the edge is. There has to be a sense of there's something that feels contrary that I now need to adjust towards, because otherwise we're just floating in a state of either non-awareness or bliss. Everything's perfect, so we don't have to adjust everything, or I have no awareness of anything, so anything could destroy me and I know nothing about it. And one of the things that from one of my early kinesiology tutors, we used to talk about the fact that living biological systems, they have a natural propensity to move towards entropy, to essentially break down into chaos unless fresh energy is added to bring order. And finding out what's going to send us down into chaos. If I stop breathing, I'll degenerate into chaos pretty quickly. If I don't take on fluids, I'll degenerate into chaos, and so on. But working out what the refinements of those are at different levels, even down to if I don't have enough of the right types of relationships, I will, degrade down into chaos again. So I think that's quite an important aspect of it as well. And then there was one more thing, but it's just jumped out of my head for a second. But we'll come back to that maybe. Let's see if
it pops up. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that space between disequilibrium and equilibrium. Maximum growth occurs on the edge of support and challenge, of order and chaos. So to some degree, like disease, however it manifests, it doesn't really care about you. It's just about the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
So it's just going to happen regardless whether you care about it or not.
Yeah, and yes and no.
Yeah,
because we certainly, yes, except in all the places where it doesn't. There's a good case for how we construct our reality having quite a direct impact on whether or not disease shows up and how it shows up. And in fact, this brings me back to the point that I almost didn't remember, but comes back to the nature of the fertility of the soil. And again, it's interesting that to a degree we have judgment around that, because what are we talking about the soil being fertile for? And in very great case of point for our current corona experience in the world at the moment, on his deathbed, not a lot of people know that Louis Pasteur, the discoverer of pasteurization, recanted his belief. And he said, and he referred to another scientist who'd come up with the concept of terrain theory. And he said, it's not the bacterium that's the problem, it's the environment it lives in. And that's exactly the point. So if I am fertile for a particular condition to arise, then it can do. If I'm not, then it can't. So for instance, if I'm going to become a good fighter, for example, then the soil that's going to be fertile is to be in a situation where I can practice conflict, whatever that is. If I'm going to be fertile at peace, I need to be in a situation where I can engage with that. So the soil will become fertile for the thing that it's fertile for. And that as well is a case of awareness. Because as if we come back to the idea that anything in the right proportion is a medicine or the wrong proportion is a poison, it just depends what you're trying to create.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. So I did mention disease. What do you view disease as? It's obviously taught to us as, ultimately, at least to me, what I was originally taught about disease as was it's something that is external coming to attack you. But obviously my views have shifted massively now. But I would love to hear kind of your perspective, I guess, around two kind of things, the symptom, illnesses and disease, and then the healing process. Like what does even that mean as well?
Yeah. Again, I think it depends on whose perspective you want to look at it from. Because, for example, if I get, let's say, a bacterial infection or I develop cancer, then, that's perfect for the bacteria or for the cancer. They're in a greater state of coherence. Their health is increasing. So, whose disease are we really talking about? if I'm just looking at me as I identify myself, then again, it's about whether or not I'm able to do the things that I would like to do. And when I can't, that is a state of dis-ease.
Mm.
There is a limitation, there's a restriction that's taking place. And we could look at it from a physical disease, a mental disease, an emotional disease, a spiritual disease. Where is it that that limitation is created? And then what do I need to do to allow myself to come back to a space of ease and joy, and something that, again, it is following that green light, following the flow. So I guess disease in a lot of ways, the thing that identifies as being in disease is out of flow.
Mm. Yeah, I that's such a good way to think about it, because it's not compartmentalized. Like, it's not just like these separate things that are all influencing me. It's just I'm not in congruence with the song. Like, I'm currently playing the song a little bit out of tune, or something is distracting me or interacting with me in the environment, causing me to lose my groove.
Exactly. We are in response. From Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, from the point of view, there's always the space between the stimulus, whatever that is externally, and our response. So in some way, disease is our response to a stimuli. And that's why, and my joke for 20 years now at this time of year, I say to clients, why does only half the office get the Christmas cold? Why do we only end up with some people being in that state of disease? Because their environments are fertile for it. They're harbingers of that space, whereas those who stay well, the way they engage with life is a different coherence.
Yeah, I really love that. I because obviously there's so many different perspectives that we can take on any one topics that we're talking about. But I now take at least one perspective, that disease almost seems like the facilitator to help us go from one pattern to a next higher level of pattern. So it's kind of the thing that kicks us off balance to go into disequilibrium, to play around in the chaos realm and learn our stuff. And then once we learn the lesson, we come back and, all of a sudden we've acquired skills and higher awareness. And, we're at this new higher pattern of organization. And I just think with that perspective, you're embracing it now. It's almost like it's a gift. It's like, thank you, dis-ease, for coming into my life, for assisting me to evolve and to grow.
I mean, I think you're right in that, but I think there's other aspects to that story as well. And if you look again into some of the 5-element theory and some of the Chinese energy theories, the universe gives us a spark of life. That's why we can't just put all the components of a body in a jar and we have life. We need something to animate us. Our yuan qi, our original energy that comes into our body. And that's stored in this central channel in the body in Chong Mai. And it's our potential. It's the universe offering us an option, a possibility of what we can explore through this vessel in this life. But the universe is also dispassionate about that, because, on a time scale, we're nothing to it. So if you don't do it, it'll just take it back and it'll pass it on somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So as much as I think that disease has the option to be that motivator for us, it's also totally dispassionate about that, in the fact that it's either going to take us down into chaos and into entropy, and we're going to dissolve back into the cosmic soup, and that's perfectly fine. It doesn't actually matter. Or we can use it as a signal, as a reference, as a catalyst for change. But whether we do or we don't need to judge that. It's not important. It's just there as a choice.
Yeah, thank you for balancing me and providing the opposing side to that story. No, because that's so much more humbling, when you really balance it and see it from both sides. Yeah, I mean, there's the aspect that it's either gifting us it for a beneficial reason, or it's discompassionately gifting us it still, because again, there's no judgment. But then I think there's also the component that we as individuals manufacture our own potential diseases through our choices and decisions and the way as open-ended systems that we interact with the environment.
Absolutely, because otherwise we become too egocentric about it. We become the center of the universe, and as much as we are our own center within the universe, the idea of Foucault's pendulum, we are also not. We're not the only thing. There is a multitude, and in fact, an infinite expression of possibilities, and we are only one possibility. So whether we do or we don't is immaterial, rather. But the option is there, and if we do, and if we're in coherence and we're in flow and we're following those green lights, then we have the possibility of experiencing something incredible within our lives.
Yeah. Do you work with, do you have a common theme with the people that you work with? Is there a reoccurring theme that shows up, a pattern, or is it very unique and individual?
I mean, at the kind of the biggest level, they all know that something ain't right, and they want to change it. So that's the theme, and they are on their journey, and whether they have acknowledged it as a journey or not, they are experiencing themselves in this journey, and they know that there is something that doesn't feel right. Whether or not they only identify with that at a physical level, I have pain, my digestion doesn't work, my hormones are out of balance, whether or not they're coming at it from a mental emotional level, whether they're coming at it from a spiritual level, or a combination of those, they just know that something isn't right, and they're in a quest to seek that harmonization and that balance within themselves, which for some of them has come because they've been down a mainstream medical route and it hasn't resolved for them. For others, they're working at a much more kind of spiritual level, or a much more personal development, personal journey level, and they just want someone to journey with them. They want some support and some orientation within the journey that shines a spotlight on something that they know they need to look at, but they don't know where to shine the spotlight.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you work with, do you work with, or have you ever worked with anyone where you found kind of the root manifestation of whatever their symptom, illness, or disease was kind of within the shadow? I find this so fascinating, how our shadow material, when accumulated enough, will begin to manifest as diseases or symptoms or illness.
Oh, absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And an aspect of that could also be put into, shadow, in a sense, is a very specific set of aspects within ourselves. And I would say that for a lot of people, it's also just in unconsciousness. So it's just something that, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to observe. And shadow is certainly part of that. Sometimes it's trauma that people have compartmentalized and put away, and haven't had the right environment to be able to process those shocks at earlier periods so that they can fully integrate them. And in essence, a lot of it is about things that are then unintegrated with us. So, but definitely shadow is a key component of that. I've had a number of clients over the years who essentially have hit that dark night of the soul, and they're lost. They go into that existential crisis, and they're lost, and they don't know how to move forward. And again, that's why I use that analogy of shining the spotlight on the things that they don't see. So it's giving them that information to be able to consider more than they already knew. As we spoke about, I think in the last session, about ladder climber view, and just how as we're moving up through aspects of our awareness, we can see more, and we'll transcend and include those previous stages while gaining a new, broader perspective. But that comes with its own issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just find it so incredibly fascinating, the consciousness kind of behind the manifestations of specific, like even the location that the disease, what we're calling a disease, arises within the body. Like, people that have like eyesight problems, it's like an internal issue of not looking at something within themselves, or developing tumors on the breast from a perception of like a sexual experience. Like, to me, it's so incredible how our perception and like physiology is like instantaneously hardwired into each other. It's like in real time, the structure of our cells and even the geometry of our blood and like the structure of our water is like all instantaneously reacting and changing as we're filtering and perceiving these events. And then obviously based on the meaning and interpretation that we give it, we'll kind of almost like solidify how the body like crystallizes from how we've like that's ended the experience, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think it's important as well to recognize that it's a two-directional street. If we take those basic aspects within the quadrant theory and integral of subjective and objective, and remember, for anybody that maybe hasn't come across this, the subjective is the stuff that doesn't have a location in time and space. Okay, so our mind and our culture exist in there. And then the objective is the stuff that does have a location in time and space. It's our body and it's our environment. So the traffic is two-way. So if I create a mental image or a thought or a concept or a belief around a thing, my body will wear that shape. There will be a correlate.
Yes.
So if I contract around an idea, then my body, as the objective side of my subjective mind, will also create a contraction. And depending on how the nervous system is rigged for that, will depend where in my body that contraction takes place. And if I can't release the mind, then it will be difficult to release the body. Although sometimes, as in with good integrative body work, if you can release the body, sometimes that's the catalyst to release the mind. But then you also have the aspect that, let's say I bump into something, or I stub my toe, or I get hit, or I cut myself. I will, the physical had the issue, and then my mind will create a belief, an idea, a thought around that physical impact. So it comes from both directions, and it just depends on each circumstance, which way that has occurred first.
Yeah, absolutely. That just makes so much sense. I connected a lot of dots. Actually, I think, and the way that I interpret it was, I'm sure you're aware of David Bohm, the quantum physicist. Yeah, so it's almost like the subjective kind of mind and part of us is like the implicate order, and then the body and the objective part is the explicate order. So there's an underlying pattern, and then you have that manifestation of that being our body. And I guess the other image that comes up is maybe from only half of the picture would be like cymatics, very similar in like, the frequency creating that manifestation. So our thoughts, constructs, ideas, creating that framework, and then that manifesting in our body.
And that comes straight back again to this coherence and dissonance. When we're listening to music that we love, we feel good, we want to move, our body feels alive, everything is perfect. If somebody puts on something that we don't like, contracted, body feels heavy, awkward. So again, we're always in this stimulus and response kind of space. There is a stimulus coming from somewhere, and then that choice of how we respond, which is why for me, health is that ability to be able to come back to neutral, come back to center, dissolve whatever it is that's going on, and be in your own healthy space.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. That's the kind of song that I'm dancing to with you. Ben, I kind of wanted to get into some other stuff, but just based on time, I will hold them out and probably invite you again back on in the future. I'd love to get into more the nutrition and like exercise and kind of get into more stuff from that integral perspective, but that's a whole nother podcast. But I'm so glad that we could kind of cover the foundation of like what is health and the healing process and disease. I think that's so important for people to have an understanding around, obviously due to how mainstream has completely distorted that and everything else and taken advantage of that. So where can people connect with you if they haven't listened to the first one and they're just tuning into this one?
Yeah.
your website and everything like that.
Absolutely. So very simple. Website is bencolder.co.uk, and that's Calder for my surname. So bencolder.co.uk. You can also find me on Instagram at Benji Calder, and you can find me on Facebook, Ben Calder Integral Health. So nice, easy stuff to get. And I would be more than honored to come back and speak with you for a third part, looking at some of these other aspects, because as you can see, there's just so much cool shit to talk about. And it's always a pleasure to come and speak with you, Lachlan. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I so look forward to these conversations. Obviously, as I've told you pre-podcast, I just find this integral model so nourishing, like on a really deep level. And I just want to share this with people because there's so much within it that's valuable and that people can integrate into their life. So whole lot of love for you, Ben. And yeah, we will connect soon.
You too, Lachlan. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.